one of the things that we've been talking about this summer is how you can use your summer to be most ready for the school year. I hope that at least in some areas of the Montessori curriculum you enjoy making materials. If you don't, you may be in the wrong place. For the children to learn at their own pace and according to their own interests, one of the things we do is prepare the classroom so that the materials they need either to learn with us or completely independently are there and available for them. What I'm going to feature in this episode is a way to create those materials relatively inexpensively, and also a few specific tips and techniques for putting materials together that involve larger pieces of paper. Now, I hope that the title intrigued you. Cut up your books and your posters too. Now, obviously, you're not going to cut apart all of them, but I do hope you'll cut some apart, and I hope by the time we're finished with this segment, it will make sense to you why I suggest that you do that. Now, as I said, one of the things that I'm going to show you is how to mount larger pieces, a large part of a poster or a full page from a book to be able to use as materials. Before we do that, I'm going to talk about some of the books that I do cut up, why I cut them up, show you some of the materials that result when you do make that decision. Now, the way that I'm set up here is on a table with a nice piece of packing paper. As you'll see a little later in this segment, when you see some of my moving boxes, I am in the process of moving, so I've got some nice packing paper from the U-Haul store that maybe the wind will cooperate with me and maybe it won't. We'll work around it. But usually when I do this, I use my newspapers. So what I'm going to do before we talk about the books that we're going to use and demonstrate how to mount things on them, I'm going to show you how I would normally be set up. Normally, I would save my newspapers, and then I would open them up like this, and I would have them set in a stack on my space. And that would then allow me, each time I spray mount something, to just turn my newspaper over and have a clean surface. I'm not going to do that here because the print of the newsprint would be a little bit distracting, but I wanted to make sure that I showed you that before we went on from here. Now, why would I want to cut up my books? Well, one reason is that in the form that most books come in, they're a little bit overwhelming for children to use. Now, these are books designed for adult readers, not for children, but within them are pieces that can be made into materials that are very accessible even to relatively young children. This is evidence of the earliest known life on Earth. These fossilized blue-green algae from Canada may be 2 billion years old. This is a perfect illustration for some of our cosmic curriculum that we do in the Montessori classroom. But is a child going to go into a book this size? Probably not. Within books such as the nature library books that you can typically find, I've paid $1 for this at a thrift store, you will find all kinds of illustrations. Sometimes you'll find charts, stop lapse photography sequences, all kinds of things that you might be able to use to make materials in your classroom. Now, you notice it kind of looks like a book, but the spine is gone. I didn't do that myself. I take it to a copy store in my neighborhood. It happens to be in Alpha Graphics, and for $1 or $2, they chop the spines off, and then your pages are very, very beautiful. So if you did have a page where you wanted to use the full illustration, then you've got it nicely and neatly cut for you already. So there's an example of one book that you might want to cut up. Now, you're probably going to notice that some of these look pretty old. I don't tend to pay a lot for the books that I get. This happened to be a series from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and it isn't actually books so much that I'm going to be showing you how I mounted from these, but prints that came with the book. When you shop the thrift stores, I think you'll be surprised how many wonderful finds you can get for materials for your classroom. Now I'm going to show you just a few more things on the books, and then I'll show you how to mount these for use in the classroom. Here's just a couple more examples from children's books. In this case, some nice definitions, very simple. What is a scientist? What do scientists do? When you make these into cards that you have on your shelves, it's going to make it easier for you to make sure you cover some of those things that maybe you might not think of. Now, some of the sheets you might use would be very simple. Some of them may be a little bit more complex. Even though I certainly believe in line drawings and hand-colored materials in the classroom, sometimes beautiful pages from a book can be one of the most easy and effective ways to illustrate some of the aspects of our botany curriculum, examples of grasses and cereals in this case, fruits and seeds in this case. Here's a nice, somewhat simplified table of the elements from a children's book. Now, one of the things that I like to do is I like to have cards that help me to illustrate whatever aspect of the curriculum that I'm doing. If I have a Black history things that I've got going on in my classroom, then if I have cards of famous Black Americans out on my shelf, that's going to make it easier for me to do what I'm doing. Now, this is an example of both an illustration for perhaps some of the lessons I would do around President's Day. It is also a piece of artwork. I took a page from a book that tells about this particular portrait and mounted it on the back so that I would have that information just readily available. Now, I would hope that some of these portraits would be ones that you would actually want to display in your classroom. Now, the boards that you see me displaying here are actually 11 by 11. They're not mat board, they're not that expensive. You can also use thinner boards such as cardstock. Oversized cardstock that people use for scrapbooking projects is definitely an option there. Here's another example of the sources for books from the remainder table at a big box bookstore probably. And you can see, even though these maps are designed for adults to study, they are certainly simple enough to be useful for children. Putting the big book on the shelf is fine, especially if you're in maybe an upper elementary class. However, I found that using the maps cut out of the books may be supplemented with other maps that you use. Some of the maps you can purchase, such as from Montessori for Everyone, a very, very simple map here, but then some of the children are going to want more depth. And when you have a single map like this, again, this is mounted on just regular cardstock, I found that it does enhance what you're doing in your classroom. Now, in addition to the maps, you can also cut other things out of books to have on the cards. I love the What Your Child Should Know books from the cultural literacy folks. And those combined with the maps can really make a nice cultural study. Notice that all of the things that I've been showing you are mounted on green, because green is the color of the African continent. My Egyptian studies, a lot of my African studies are colored that way. Sometimes then I will add in other colors that maybe aren't part of the traditional coloring for Montessori. This is the Roman Empire in 68 AD. Here is actually a traditional map that I got out of probably a National Geographic, maybe a book, I'm not sure. But you can see how I use these cut-up books to enhance the units in the classroom. Now, what I'm going to demonstrate mounting for you in just a few minutes is some artwork. Again, remainder tables are wonderful for large size artwork that can be used just like this. It can be set up on an easel on the shelf in the classroom. Michael Olaf has a wonderful set of frames that actually allow you to slip in an 11 by 11 size board or piece of work like this. And this is a great way to let children make choices in the classroom of what art they're going to have on display, as well as displaying art or other things that you'd like to. I do sometimes mount cards that are informational, not just full-size pieces of art, but it is a wonderful way to enhance your studies of the ancient civilizations and anything else that you want to do. Now, before I show you how to mount them, I am going to show you some examples of posters that I cut up, as well as the books, and I'll show you and explain to you why I do that. Seems like the birds are a little bit interested, or maybe it's just the time of day, and that's all right. What I've got here is a simple poster from the dollar store showing the life cycle of a butterfly. The egg, the caterpillar, the growing caterpillar, the chrysalis, the butterfly emerging from the chrysalis, and then the butterfly itself. Now you can see this is a cut up poster, but by cutting the poster up, the children then can use the element of movement to arrange the life cycle. I have one of those, same thing for a frog. And one of the things that I found is sometimes a poster that would be interesting as a poster, these are the animals from the poster, but here are the illustrations of their skeletons. How much more interesting to have these on cards where the children can sit and hold and really look at these skeletons and then match them to the animals that they are from. Now, the last reason that I want to show you why I like the idea of cutting up posters is most of them are too busy for the children to really get a lot out of anyway. This is a wonderful set of information on insects, order after order after order, but how much time would we actually spend looking at these beautiful illustrations grouped by order if they were on a big poster sitting on the wall? In my experience, most adults and most children just ignore them. Here we have a beautiful illustration, color illustration of the parts of the insect's body. Great to use to help define an insect in your lesson. 3 major body divisions, 6 legs, 2 antennae. Wonderful as you're helping the children understand what an insect is. Here's the life cycle, and then a lovely chart that works great on its own, but was way too much on the poster with all this other information of the different ways that insects camouflage themselves. So this is just one more reason why taking your posters, cutting them up, and making them shelf materials is a way that I feel like you can make best use of that information. So what I'm going to do is show you how I would mount full page items or large cut down items on the board as we've been discussing. Now when I do this, because it is a little bit messy, I do like to wear gloves, and I will have my work area set up where I have a stack of my boards that I'm going to be mounting onto, this size or my colored cardstock, whatever it is, off to the side, and then I will have the stack of the materials that I'm going to mount set in a stack nearby as well. As I said, this would normally be covered with newspaper. I'm just having the bright paper so you can see the process a little bit better. So one of the reasons that I have everything set up is so I make sure that I'm going to do the right side of the page. With this, it's easy. With something like this, I don't want to get confused and accidentally spray my adhesive on this side when this is where I want it. So I have everything stacked up upside down. So what I'm going to do is on my spray area, I would normally have 4 pieces all set out so that I can spray each one and then mount them and then change out my newspaper and spray the next set. Now occasionally I may have only one copy of a book and I'm going to choose which page I find most interesting. In this case, this is a little bit of information about Dürer, the artist, and this is the one that I want, so I'm going to be upside down. Now, with my spray mint, I want to make sure it's well shaken, and then I'm going to spray just as you would with spray paint. I'm going to come over the edges, and you can see this is a very quick way to be able to spray things pretty quickly. Now I would then have a surface next to me where I'd have my stack either somewhere nearby here, so I can flip over each piece, position it on my board. And I obviously am doing this a little bit different for filming. And then I would have a place where I can set it out of the way. So the more well thought out you've got your workspace, the easier it's going to be. Now, as long as you've sprayed only one part, only one of your surfaces, not the board that you're mounting and the other board, but just the picture that you want mounted, this is a little bit forgiving. So if I get it a little bit wrong, I can lift it up and shift it until I get it more the way that I want it to be. Now I'm not going to want to set it down right here because remember, this is where I was spraying. So I'm going to have a place off to the side where I can adhere it on my board and set it off away. Now the last piece that I want to make sure that you understand is that with more practice, you can see how to line these up on your board pretty well. What I tend to do is I look side to side first. So right now I'm looking at these two places to make sure I've got a fairly even margin left and right. Now when you mount art, so it doesn't look like it's floating, you kind of want a little bit more space on the bottom. So you're going to see that I'm going to leave a little less space at the top and a little more at the bottom as I organize myself. And you know, I don't always worry about getting it perfect. This is probably enough more margin over here that I'm going to shift it. But if it's not exact, as long as you've got fairly straight margins, I think you'll be pleased with the aesthetics of your large mounted works. And that is how we mount large maps, pieces of artwork, other things that are oversized. Of course, you're not going to want to cut up all of your posters. Some of your posters, including your oversized maps and others like the one that you see here, you'll want to keep whole. One way to display them for a short period of time, a few hours or a few days, is in a holder like this on a nail on the wall. The box you see here is one that I scavenged when we got new computers, and you can see that it is a very nice way to keep the dust off and to have posters of a slightly smaller size easily accessible. As you may have guessed from the boxes you see here, I am in the process of moving. This is a small size U-Haul box, pretty easily available in the United States, with a second on top of it. Now I will be taping these up, but they in this form are a nice way to store your larger posters. What you can see is that you've got the big size maps rolled up. You can use the bottom box as the base that the posters are stored in and use the other box as a lid. So I hope that you will at least consider some of your books that aren't getting used or shopping for books at the thrift store for help in making your materials for your classroom. We've seen some ways to store posters if you are going to keep them whole. One thing that I'm going to suggest is whether it's your collection of posters that you keep whole, or your artworks that you're mounting, or anything else that you're putting together in your classroom, create a good inventory list as you're doing it. I think you will find that even though this takes a little bit more time as you're making materials, it will save you so much time in the long run. Have two hard copies of it. Have one on the box, wherever you're storing these things. Have another in a master notebook. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a later episode. And I suggest that these kinds of ways of staying organized will allow you to make even more use of your materials, so these things that you spend this time working on don't end up staying on the shelf. I do hope that you will take time this summer to do some projects that you enjoy. If art is something you enjoy, that's one reason I'm showing this at this time. If you're really into zoology and you'd like to make some zoology materials for your shelf, or whatever your interest is, use some of this time to make those things so that your year next year will be even richer for both you and for the children.